Welcome to the Strategic Pursuit Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Macias, and today we have a special guest. His name is Christian Hassold. Christian, it is great to have you.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Christian, for people that don't know your background, let's give a little bit of a summary. How did you get to this point in your journey?
I am a recovering founder CEO. I've built and sold three companies over the last 20 some odd years. My last company was acquired in 2017 by what was a public company, Channel Advisor. It's now called Rhythm, and it's private equity backed by Insight Partners, among a couple of others. And what you should know about my background is even before I got into corporate development, which is what happened when Channel Advisor acquired my company, they found a job for me and said, "Hey, do you want to run corporate development for us?" The reason why they did that is because over my career of building companies, one of the ways that I put the foot on the gas in terms of growth was through M&A or inorganic or indirect growth strategies, joint ventures, partnerships, things that allowed the business that I was running to go twice as fast by joining hands in different ways with others. And so that led to what is now my career in corporate development. I have built from scratch the corporate development function for 3, 4 different companies and overseen a half a dozen transactions with about 350 million in enterprise value created over that short span of a career. That is a big number for some, a small number for others. I operate principally in the lower middle market. So I've done enterprise software, SaaS, if you will, and more recently in the marketing agency ecosystem. And I should add for a plug that I've learned over the years that there's a lot to be learned in lower middle market M&A, and so I talk about that with my podcast partner Ayelet Shipley on the Inorganic podcast.
Amazing. For anybody that hasn't heard it, let's check it out because I know Christian is a wealth of knowledge. But Christian, I want to talk about integration, specifically for somebody that just has a brief understanding about it, maybe has the idea that I'm going to go ahead and acquire a business and I'm going to roll another business into it eventually. And integration is going to be part of that, but I'm going to cross that road when I get to it. For a beginner, what does that look like?
So I think when people hear about integration in the context of M&A, if you're not familiar with it, you probably just think, well, we're just going to smash these buildings and these people together and just get them to start working together. As a practical matter, the purpose of integration should not just be about moving people around and making sure that the job they have is still the job that they're going to have on the other side. It should be about a much greater purpose. Any M&A transaction should be backed against a thesis. And that's a thesis that by bringing two businesses together, 1 and 1 plus 1 is going to equal 3. How will it equal 3? It will be we're going to cross sell products that we both have to our respective customers. We're going to gain a technology advantage that we didn't have before. We'll have a new product to sell that we didn't have before, or we'll have advantage in terms of market position, whether it's expansion from a geographical perspective or expansion in terms of as many possible angles, but generally it's about products and capabilities and geographies, things like that. So when they have a thesis, you want to back into that thesis what needs to be true about the combination in order for this thesis to be fulfilled. So, in keeping it very simple, let's say that the thesis is that I am acquiring a company so I can cross sell that product into my customer base. So, let's just say that Microsoft is acquiring a small software company like we'll pick Zoom Communications. Let's say they decided that Teams isn't a great experience, so they're going to acquire Zoom, and we're going back years. Let's pretend Zoom was still a small company. It's a much bigger company now, but Zoom is a small company. Microsoft is decided to acquire Zoom because they want to have a better meeting experience for their customers and they want to cross sell Zoom into the Microsoft client base. In order for that to be true, the number one thing that has to happen is the sellers at Microsoft need to know what is Zoom, what are its features, its value proposition, what's its pricing, and how to sell it into the client base. You want to activate the ability to sell Zoom into Microsoft's customer base. The second thing that you're going to want to do is identify clients in Zoom's customer base that are not using all of Microsoft's many products and activate the ability to sell those products into the acquired company's customer base. So what we're tactically focusing on is the thesis is we're going to grow these two businesses by selling products in. Now let's arm those respective people and teams with the ability to sell. What we didn't do was change a bunch of job titles for a lot of people who don't need their jobs changed. We didn't stop Zoom from making product. We haven't changed the way, Microsoft is building their products. We're really narrowly focused on creating value through a joint selling proposition. Now, one thing that happens when companies come together is there are back office functions that are being duplicated. Strategic finance, day-to-day accounting, legal, administration. There are replications and functions that frequently us M&A folks use a term like synergies, which is to say there are two duplicated roles. We don't need two roles. We're going to turn this into one role or one function and consolidate them. And over time, we'll come up with a plan to consolidate them and get back a dollar in terms of cost savings. Post-merger integration is the process of identifying the ways that you are going to fully realize the value of an acquisition and make that happen by organizing the people around the objectives that you want to accomplish over a period of time.
That's great. Thank you for summarizing that. That's very easy to understand. Now, when should somebody realistically be thinking about the integration process when, let's say, purchasing the first acquisition, already having in mind that they're going to be acquiring another? When does that integration have to be already set in mind and already starting to plan for it, essentially?
Great question. So, a couple of steps. The first is the moment that you decide you want to be acquisitive, someone in the building should be identified as the person who is going to have ownership for post-merger integration. Most people say, "Oh, HR is in charge of that," or the people team. That's not always the case. The person who's in charge of post-merger integration can be someone on the people or HR team, but it also could be someone who is really good at project management and really good at organizing people. It should be someone with really good soft skills and the ability to listen and observe and make recommendations and has the trust of leadership around the company. So you need to make sure that someone, whether it is one of the co-founders or the head of people or somebody, has ownership for it and they have a plan for how to carry out post-merger integration. As an operator, whether you are the CEO making the decision to carry out an acquisition or the corporate development leader who is running the actual deal, the PMI plan, you start thinking about that the minute that you're about to sign a term sheet. And, there's always a little bit of what I like to call mom's meatloaf in terms of the recipe, meaning how your mom makes meatloaf and my mom make meatloaf are two different ways to make meatloaf. It's still really good. The choice to determine the post-merger integration plan before signing the term sheet is one route you can take, or after. The most important part of the making of the PMI plan is that the acquired party is a part of the conversation. It needs to be a two-way conversation. In my most recent experience at W Promote, my partner, Stephen Power, who was the executive chair, and I actually came up on the fly with this term, which I now use, called the shared expectations workshop. I don't know if there's a better way to describe it. And that is when you're bringing two companies together, you need to have shared expectations about why you're bringing these businesses together, who's going to be doing what, and what outcomes you're going to drive that are going to be mutually beneficial beyond just, I'm going to give you some money in exchange for letting us own your company. You really need to have deep agreements about what's going to happen. That needs to happen around the time that you're agreeing to do the deal. Usually, by the time the term sheet is signed, you should have the drafting of a PMI plan, and that starts the work of actually running the PMI process.
Okay. And that similar mindset, goal, vision, already aligned, that's key before that term sheet comes into play. Now, how would you go about that process? Is there systems that you already have that can be duplicated and done over and over that you can share?
Yeah, look, I think one thing I should share is I've seen a lot of good PMI, but I'm not a PMI expert. There are actually experts. So the first thing that I would say is if you're doing PMI for the first time as a company, go through the trouble to find a advisor or a partner. There are a lot of people who do fractional post-merger integration. They're out there and they're very reasonable and cost effective, and they can help you by giving you templates and playbooks and things to follow to make sure that you're exercising and implementing best practices as you go through the process. The first is that you as the acquirer just sit down and define what is it that you want to get out of this acquisition? What are sort of your non-negotiables? And make sure you're ready to discuss those non-negotiables and explore them collaboratively with the acquired partner. So this number one is sort of know what you want to accomplish and what must be true. Two, have a plan to communicate them and discuss them in a collaborative way. And three, have a plan to hear what the acquired party, what are their non-negotiables, what's important to them. And then create an environment, a room where you can sit down and human to human have that conversation. From there, you're going to get a list of actions that are follow on conversations that need to happen. Like we might agree that these two departments need to be combined. Two leaders from both the acquired and the acquiring company need to have a follow on conversation about tactically how that's going to happen. Every single thing that needs to occur needs sort of a plan to be followed on. So PMI's role as a project manager is to make sure that as a part of their day jobs that they're already doing, that these teams are also making progress on their post-merger integration plans. And there's a balance in not driving people crazy and giving them too many tasks and to-do lists. So I'd say that's kind of like one box of steps. Another box of steps in post-merger integration is the acquiring company actually making plans for how they're going to make the other company successful. Some of them are as simple as who's going to use what technology? Do we have a team ready to make sure that on day one they have email? Do we have a team ready on day one to make sure that they've got our company t-shirts? Are we going to make special t-shirts for the acquisition? And then another important step, which is probably the most important, is thinking about the other side. A lot of the process around PMI and the negotiation of the deal is dealing with the leaders of the company. But you're also acquiring 20, 30, 40, 100 people. And when you're acquiring that many people, the number one thing that people think of on day one is what's going to happen to my job? How is my life going to be different because of this acquisition? And if they don't have clarity on that, they immediately get very nervous. When they get nervous, it manifests themselves in one of two not good ways. It distracts them from doing their job, so they start worrying about their own job. They start talking with other colleagues about how they're concerned and distracted and catastrophizing about all the things that could go wrong because they don't know. And then, two, they might actually start going looking for another job. And so, one really important step is to get ahead of that by thinking about how you're going to communicate the story, how you're going to make it clear that life is still going to be just the way it was. Everything's going to be fine, even though we're coming together, and act upon that by carrying out human to human activities. Let's do a all hands launch event at the headquarters. Let's do an outing together in a common location where the teams can get together and hang out. And it's not just about doing it once, it's about doing a cycle of different sort of human to human activities where you make the teams truly feel like they are part of a much larger ship. Small companies, this is super easy to do. Big companies, this is really hard because it gets expensive really fast. And most CEOs and CFOs are like, whoa, this acquisition just is about to cost $200,000 in travel expenses and getting people into hotel rooms to spend time together. So that's the second bucket of steps. The third step is what I call the day one plan. And that is, how do you actually activate the acquisition the day it's closed? What are all the activities? Communications internally, communications externally, how you start collaborating and working together and telling people clearly what is going to be different, what is not going to be different, and most importantly, activating on the thesis, which is what we talked about at the top, is selling more products between the two companies.
It really is about just reducing the risk, the integration process, but not improving performance right from the get-go. That comes after the fact. And like you said, the people are the number one risk. And those are the people that you really have to put their minds at ease. Cause I can't imagine myself being a W-2 or an employee and somebody coming in, buying out the business, and then looking at every single one of you like, who, who's going to get fired first? You're automatically going to think you're the one to go. So that could definitely cause some anxiety in a lot of people. So that process in itself, putting somebody's mind at ease, is there some sort of a playbook for that in particular that you've seen work best?
I mean, it's less about a playbook and it's more about over communication, consistent communication, repeated communication, and, walking the talk. That humans are, we are all very simple. If we hear the same thing over and over again and the same thing keeps actively being true, like we're not seeing you say one thing and do another, like we're not eliminating any roles. And then 2 weeks later, you eliminate 2 dozen roles. That makes people nervous because you said you weren't going to do something and now you do it. And you can never under index the communication, especially in the first 90 days as teams are coming together. One thing that's frequently underestimated, especially when larger companies acquire smaller, the thing that occurs to a lot of people work intentionally for smaller companies because of the creative license it affords, because of the span of control and responsibility that they're able to experience in a 50-person company. The minute that you have a job in a 1,000-person company, some people lose a sense of personal identity with their role because they no longer are able to just go talk to the CEO and give them their ideas, or someone isn't saying like, hey, just go do. In a 50-person company, you frequently just be told, hey, look, you have a great idea, just go do it. In a 1,000-person company, there's like steps and processes and people to talk to, and you don't have that span of control. So one thing that you also should be thinking about, and I've had debates with founders about it, is when a large company is acquiring a smaller company, part of the calculus is you're going to lose some of the people, no longer feel like they are a part of the same company anymore. And that's an attrition rate calculation. So there's two ways to play that. One is you over-index by trying to keep those people in the building by over communicating with them and identifying those people and being like, look, we still really value your working style and we want you here. Another way to play it is say, look, the company is going to change. It's going to be really different than it was before. And we'd rather you be really happy here. So package A is you stay and here's your role and things are going to change. And package B is we're actually going to pay you to leave. We're going to give you 3 months severance. We're going to give you a transitional role where essentially you can transition. And for every week you stay, for every month you stay, you get a month in severance up to 3 months or up to X number of weeks. And that's because we actually want you to be here. And when you give people those kinds of options, it's interesting to see what options people elect. And you'd be surprised the number of people who are like happy to say, you know what, this isn't the place that I signed up for. And I'd rather transition out. And thank you for giving me that.
That's great advice. What does that reveal, right? Talking to those employees before investors or getting too much in the weeds of the business acquisition itself. Do you recommend that first focus is the employees?
Well, you should always be thinking about the people.
Mm.
That does not mean that you want to tell anybody, and most of the times in most acquisitions, all but a very small group of people are aware of the acquisition taking place. There are countries like France, you are not always afforded the ability to keep things prior to closing. that's a rabbit hole for a different episode. But best practice is a very small group of people on both sides are aware that the acquisition is going to occur. And as a consequence, that does give you the choice to have to save those conversations until the day before closing, the day after closing. There's different dynamics. Smaller deals, you might treat them a little bit differently than sellers, but these conversations are generally happening around the first, week or less after closing and are curated very carefully where people who are a part of the acquiring team and a part of the acquired, having this conversation in a very, I think, collaborative and safe environment with the employees that may be affected.
You spoke earlier about systems and having somebody really take the lead on making sure those systems are going to be integrated, what systems are going to be used from the acquired to the acquiring. Based off of your experience now, what's that one system you wish you would have had implemented earlier on that maybe you didn't think about?
You'd be surprised. It actually really simple. The number one thing that drives both the acquired and the acquiring employees nuts is when they can't communicate easily. So usually it's Slack and email. The ability to see and communicate with one another seamlessly in the current era is it's increasingly important. So usually those are the first level things that, if not done well, you will hear about. And if done, people will be really delighted that they can see their people. And then for the acquired employees, they tend to be pretty interested in the democratization of the benefits, like what are the bonuses, what are the holidays, what are your medical benefits, and wanting those to be aligned, so there are no second class citizens. Of course, compensation becomes a hot topic as well, which is, an equivalent position at the acquiring company is paid $20,000 less than an equivalent position at the acquired company. Those things are a little bit harder to sort out. And the reason why they're harder to sort out is, number one, the acquiring company frequently has a little bit more people infrastructure process and just has to pay more market competitive rates for people. The other is that the job descriptions, the title is the same, but the actual tenure and leveling of the role is different. And so usually there's a bit of a rub. It's like, well, I'm an account manager too, and they're an account manager too, so we should be getting paid the same. But as it turns out, the account manager too at this company actually has 7 years experience and owns a $2 million book of business, and the account manager too at the acquired company has 3 years experience and manages a $500,000 book of business. There's two completely different spans of responsibility. And so it does frustrate people, but a practical reality is it usually takes the people team and the leadership anywhere between 6 months and a year to align the compensation structures in the right way. And they tend to take more time to do that, not so much to save the money. I mean, obviously, conserving capital is a part of it, but it's also to just make sure that you're being fair and equal to everybody around the company in terms of how you define the roles and define compensation. Because the minute you start implementing these programs, you're changing leveling, you're changing titles, you're shifting people around. You only want to do that once. You don't want to do it twice. That is a system thing because it's, HRIS, HR information system related tooling that goes into making all that happen. It is also just a tactical method of working and managing and dealing with employees. And so you have to be really cognizant of sort of those first order things that are both system wise, impacting people, and mentally impacting their happiness.
What's your input on branding? I had a guest on the podcast the other day, and he was actually in the construction industry and he was purchasing some of these long ran 40, 50, 100-year businesses in the trades. And rather than him integrating everything into one brand, he was still keeping the name, everything completely separate, which is the first time that I've ever heard of someone doing that. But Obviously, there's a lot of sense to that as well because the argument is the name is there. It's a strong name, it has reputation, and obviously you'll get clients that look for that expertise and that name. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you said something really important about brand recognition. What's in a brand name is the recognition. What is the client or the prospect's affinity with that brand? How is that brand not only driving new revenue, but driving retention? Again, working back from the deal thesis, and this is a part of the shared expectations discussion you should be having around term sheet timing, is what happens to the brand. Every single founder and operator cares about the brand. Some more than others care about the brand. You should always work backwards from what is the value by retaining the brand permanently, indefinitely, undefined, and what is the value that we give up or leave on the table by transitioning brand on day one. I can point you to numerous strategics, including Salesforce, that do a fantastic job of identifying uh, the brand value of companies they're acquiring. You'll notice that Slack is Slack by Salesforce, Salesforce chat. They know that the brand has market affinity and they want to retain that value and that identity, which is aimed in their consumer. So I'd say that it really is a very deal by deal consideration as to whether you retain the brand or not and for what time frame you retain the brand. If someone's looking for a really simple framework, I just say go look at the sales generation of the business. And if you can see inbound leads are driving a significant amount of sales and deal flow, like you can really trace it into the CRM, not just what someone said, but what you can see is actually happening. Ask yourself if the changing of that branding is going to turn off that faucet of leads. And that should tell you how much time and care you should place into potentially shifting or changing the branding of the business.
Got you. That's awesome advice, Christian. Appreciate you making this very simple and easy to understand. Something that can be so complex for some, it can be made easy to understand for others, and you did a great job on that. So I appreciate that.
Very happy to do it.
I have to get you back on here because there's a lot more to dive into. But for now, we'll be in touch, and I appreciate again all of your knowledge and expertise and sharing it with us.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me on. It was great.